Hello, everybody. This is Will Rogers, Director of Artistic Programs at Arizona Theater Company, and we are very excited for you to join us today for the conversation we have for you. Before we get started with that, I'm going to bring you up to date a little bit. We have been really lucky this week to, on Monday, we shared our benefit reading of The White Chip, a play written by our artistic director, Sean Daniels, about his experience with addiction and recovery. And as part, we did that with the original off-Broadway cast. It was off-Broadway just last year. And that is still up online until the end of tomorrow, Friday. So if you have not seen it yet and you've just joined us for this conversation today, please do so. You can find that on our website, arizonatheater.org. And it's also on our YouTube and our Facebook. We'll make sure you find it. If you just find us online, you'll find it. As part of that, the activities around that reading, we have really had an amazing week of conversations here on Zoom, here every day with different community leaders and artists involved with that production. And today is going to be no different. Today, our conversation is about recovery in college, and which is a very hard time for anybody, or a very formative time for anybody. And so it has its own special needs, and we are going to be joined today by some folks that are in college, some folks that are dealing with populations of people in recovery in college. Over this last week or so, we have had the distinct pleasure to get to know a little better Dr. Molly McGinn and Dr. Linda Lederman, and I'm going to go ahead and bring you fine ladies into the conversation. So please come join me. There you are, Molly. Don't forget to turn your microphone on. There you go. And Linda, hi. Molly, you are the co-founder of Treehouse Learning Community, which is here in Phoenix, or in Mesa. You're
in Tempe and Prescott.
And Linda, you're a professor and the director of the Hugh Downs School of Human Communications at Arizona State University.
Yes.
Is that right? Are you joining us from Arizona today?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of get us into this conversation. I believe, Linda, you're going to start us off.
Sure, I would love to do that. I saw White Chip the other night, and it was just wonderful to see the performance. I looked at it through two lenses, I think. One, through the lens of a woman who has been in long-term recovery since 1984. And I so identified with the speaker, even though my story is very different from his story. But to hear somebody describe what he'd been like, what happened to him, and what he's like now. And that's kind of the way stories go in recovery programs like AA. I'm a communication professional, so I study stories. I study the role of narrative in health and recovery. And one of the things that I learned is that AA is a wonderful exemplar, and people who have gone through 12-step programs like AA exemplify what happens when people get together and they talk honestly about what it's like to deal with the lived experience of something like alcoholism. In fact, AA was started by two men, and now millions of people all over the world have participated in what they discovered and what they started. And they started out by discovering that they didn't know how, but if the two of them talked honestly with one another about what it was like when they drank and what they tried to stop and what it's like now, they didn't drink. They weren't sure it might help anybody else to tell them, but they found that just talking about it honestly with somebody else who'd understand really helped. From a communication perspective, that's a phenomenal thing. Usually we think when we talk, we're talking to talk to the other person. What we don't realize is that while we're talking to them, we're hearing it. And what we hear has an impact on us. And to me, that is the heart of what this recovery process is about. In fact, I'm getting a chill right now saying it to you. I'm experiencing it for myself. So I try to look at recovery, particularly recovery on college campuses. I am dedicated to destigmatizing alcoholism and recovery, because one of the reasons that so many people still suffer from it and suffer in silence is because of that stigma. They think there's something wrong with them, and there is, but what's wrong is they have an illness. They have a disease. It can be cured. It can't be cured. It can be put into remission. They can stop and they can discover an entirely new life for themselves. And you hear that and you see that in the production of White Chip. You see, he discovers that person he could have been, maybe the person he was all along that he didn't even know. I could go on for a long time, but I'm going to turn it over to my friend Molly. So let's see what you have to say, Molly.
Thanks, Linda. That's great. You know, when I went to, as it was an undergrad at Arizona State, I was definitely thinking that alcohol was the solution, not the problem, actually. And what, later on, as I started to think about, like, what is the big challenge? We've got like 1 million young people, college age, going through treatment every year that have struggled with drugs and alcohol. And most of them will want to go back to college or start to head into college. And what's going to be the situation there, right? That most of them are feeling like they need to drink or they need to use to be able to connect. Because the underlying issue has been that, you've heard like Johann Hari say that the opposite of addiction is not abstinence, it's connection. And most of us used alcohol or used drugs to be able to connect until that stopped working and we got more disconnected. So the amazing thing about young people in recovery is that they start to develop personal insight, the capacity to communicate what's going on with them, but it takes some time. So starting onto a college campus without drinking or using is a pretty scary idea. So we started Treehouse as a community for young people who wanted to be clean and sober and go to college and have a very cool community of people to live with and study with that's close to campus. So it created that environment. And they went from, social anxiety and depression and all the accompanying issues around drug and alcohol use to, over time to be able to build confidence and competence to be able to really connect, go to class, complete things, show up. And what we see is that people begin, thinking of Linda's idea about the personal narrative as they look back on what they did and what happened, and they begin to see it as, yes, they made some mistakes, but there were great lessons that they learned that are now strengths for them as they go forward. So we can talk a little bit more about that, but I'm excited to say that we've got several young people with us today that are college students, have been college students, are graduate students, and are really living the world of the collegiate environment and recovery and bringing those together.
Well, we couldn't ask for a better transition than that, Molly. So why don't we just take this opportunity to bring everybody into the room and hear from them. Guys, come on in. Let's see. There we go. Blake. Everybody. Hello. I think we were talking before. I think the best thing for us to do at this point is, like, why don't we go around and meet all of you and tell us a little bit about your story, and then we'll have a conversation together. I think that's where we are. So for the sake of our Zoom room, I'm going to say your name so that we know who should talk. But Blake, if you don't mind starting us off and just tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. Hello, I'm Blake Armstrong, and I am from Colorado. So I actually grew up with one of our other participants, Robert. And currently I'm a member of like the Treehouse community, where I've been in the role of student, and now I'm a staff member. So I'm a student life coordinator is my title, and also an academic coach. And what that means is that I'm a mentor to students that are in the community, a friend, and at times like an academic coach when they need a little help with some of the school stuff. I have a bachelor's in business administration, which I got from Boise State University. I also attended the University of Colorado Boulder for a few years, but due to my struggles with addiction, I dropped out, like took a medical withdrawal, which I think is pretty common. So a big part of coming into recovery this time was pursuing growth, and coming from my family and what I value, like a lot of that has to do with academics. So the last semester, I kind of changed gears, and I took an EMT class. And I think most of my academic pursuits in the future will be medical related. You know, I can't say for sure, but that's kind of the direction I'm going. And a big part of being successful in that has been being in this community, because you know, I did make it through college on my own when I wasn't exactly in recovery, but it could have been a lot better had I been at a place like Treehouse. So yeah, that's about it for me.
Thanks for sharing, Blake. Lauren, you want to take us go next?
Yeah, I'm Lauren Carroll. Hello. I'm a student here at Treehouse. 20 years old, from Austin, Texas. Yeah, I had never been to college. My entire high school career was just drugs. And then I was like, I'm going to take a gap year because I'm a cultured human being, you know? But really, it was just fear of going to college and I wanted to do musical theater, so having to do the whole audition process just freaked me out. And I decided to just do more drugs. And it took a lot of time for me to truly get over that fear. And how I did that was getting sober and understanding that, like, these feelings of fear don't need to have power over me anymore. And that I don't have to use those as ammo to put bad things into my body. And coming to Treehouse was a total leap of faith. Like, I'd never lived anywhere else, and I am so grateful that I came here. And it's just been really cool to be able to, like, dive into college with, like, a support system. And now I know, like, because I move out soon. Yes. When I go to, like, university, I know I have the strength and the motivation to do well. And that's not only come from, like, the help here, but also the work I've done through getting sober, which has been the greatest, most incredible experience in my life. And I now have 1 year, which is insane. And it's just crazy. And it's so worth it. And education in theater is so important to me. So, yes. That's me.
Thanks for sharing, Lauren. Sasha, how about you? You look you're somewhere very sunny.
I am somewhere very sunny right now. I'm coming from Maine, which I came up here during at the start of COVID. But my name is Sasha Ramos, and I've been in recovery from a substance use disorder since 2014. Molly, can you believe it's been that long? I am also an alumni of Treehouse Learning Community, and I'm still a graduate student at Rutgers University with the oldest collegiate recovery community, but like many students in recovery, we're non-traditional students. So I work, I go to school online, and I also work for Safe Project, which is a national nonprofit fighting to stop the addiction epidemic. And we also provide technical assistance for collegiate campuses. And I'm also working with Rob, who you see down there, on his app Reconnect Ed, that I hope he will tell you about. I want to go into a little bit about my story. I'm a Navy veteran. I'm a woman of color. My culture is Filipino. And what I learned from Treehouse and being in recovery is actually like where I found like my connection. The community that I needed, I found it at Treehouse. I had been to 7 different colleges, community colleges, universities. and I couldn't graduate. And I'm sure it was because of my using, one, two, no one to hold me accountable, and three, I just needed a lot of support. And that's what I got at Treehouse. It was so amazing when I really got to understand what perfectionism looked like. I found out that like I am an amazing student. Like I had amazing grades, and that was always inside of me, and I was always capable of doing those things, but I needed that extra support. Something that Molly had taught me early in recovery was basic accountability. And I think basic accountability is truly just like having another human there, like for you, and like you just being seen as another human doing an amazing thing, and them being a witness. So once I got into recovery, once I got to Treehouse, I started letting people like see me, and some parts I didn't like, but a lot of parts were parts that I liked, and I didn't even know that I liked. So I have so many stories that I can share with you about being at Treehouse, but I am definitely loving and living my life. And I just want to say thank you so much to Molly and the Treehouse Learning Community. I know Judy is there with you too. I went to community college there. And I took those baby steps that it takes in early recovery to just start with 2 classes, and now I'm a part-time grad student. I haven't stopped going to school. I'll be done in the next year, and you know, I'm working on a national project right now, and I just can't believe where I am today. So I'm excited to be here, and thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks. We'll keep some of those stories in mind. We'll come back to them. We'll come back.
Hey, in the
Robert, you want to
chat-
introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Rob. I'm in recovery. I currently work at the University of Colorado in Boulder for their Collegiate Recovery Center. And I can testify fully to like Blake would have done a million times better in college if like he would have gotten sober. It was a wild ride. And yeah, I'm like, it's cool to be like, have been there like during like his ride, and like have like our pre-sober days to now our sober days together. Like what a difference. I was actually reflecting on that today with a lot of my friends on how grateful I am. I'm here in Prescott visiting him right now, so I'm just like a mile away from like Molly, Lauren, and Blake. So but yeah, I ended up getting sober my last year of college through the Collegiate Recovery Program at CU Boulder. And it was just, you know, instrumental in me getting sober. I'd had legal consequences before, you know, I'd been forced into the rooms of AA, tried that out. I thought it was for old people is what I really like said. And that was actually the first thing I said to the director of the recovery center at Boulder. Like, you know, AA and sobriety is like for old people, it doesn't work for young people. What do you got? And he said, we have a space. You can hang out here and see what all the young people are doing. And exactly what I did. And I tried making friends. And it worked. I made those friends that were sober. And through those friends in that community, like they're still carrying me to this day. I continue just to like pile on friends to carry me as I gain weight and get heavier.
Especially in this time of COVID, yeah.
Yeah, munch. But yeah, and now like I work in recovery. It's something that really is much more than just a 9 to 5 to me. It's like very in alignment with my purpose. And like Sasha said, like we have this passion app that we've been building to really like dedicate to collegiate recovery to help people feel like they're part of something much larger than they can physically see. Because the class of 2020 at CU Boulder consisted of 3 sober graduates. Class of 2020 for all across the collegiate recovery communities was several hundred students. And it's hard to see that when you're alone on your campus in your small community. So I love like bringing people together in that way. So
There's this continuing thread through like a lot of the work that you guys are talking about doing, and Linda, you with your book Voices of Recovery on college campuses. Did I say it right? Is that right?
That's right. And the stories in that book are students at Rutgers who
Oh, wow.
recovery program celebrating the 25th anniversary of that program.
That's amazing. But there's this continuing thread of telling your story. I mean, your app, your book. I should have also mentioned that the Voices Project is one of the beneficiaries of the reading of the White Chip that's up online, and their entire mission is to end the stigma of addiction and recovery by having people share their stories. And certainly as theater makers, that's what we do, right? We try to tell stories, and it's been really awesome to hear that through line. It's just like a human through line, right? Like if you just don't want to be alone. People don't want to be alone, and things like addiction and recovery sometimes make us feel like we're forced to be, and we aren't. So that's really amazing. I'm gonna Molly. I think maybe you had some questions for the group, or
Yeah, I think if I can, I'd like to just invite you guys to address the issue of, when you're a college student in recovery on a college campus, how does that affect the way you think about yourselves? I guess where I'm going with that is that generally speaking, for a student or a young person who's really had an issue with drugs and alcohol, and now they're going to college, they actually don't want anybody to know how messed up they were or kind of how vulnerable they are. And they don't know who to hang out with if they're not going to drink and use. And it can be kind of lonely figuring out how to connect. So how do people that are thinking they may want to stop drinking or are already in recovery find each other on the campus? Maybe we'll go to Rob on that one. That's probably a good Robert question.
yeah, it's a good. Well, we'll see. Yeah, like the whole finding someone, like, right, your whole lifestyle has now changed, right? It's not just one aspect of your life of like, I'm putting like no more drugs and alcohol, I'm gonna get sober. Like it's my routines, right? What do I do? It's how do I be a student? How do I like study? I know drugs were a part of like, they helped me study. So just rethinking the entire college experience. So like where to find that, like, that's that piece of like space on a college campus. Like you need a space dedicated for these students to meet and hang out. Right, that's so important. Doesn't necessarily like in the beginning. I've seen tons of different spaces, right? Some are really nice and like they got pool tables, and others are like a basement, no windows. And that's what I started out like, basement, no windows, and just some couches and some tables to study on. And that was enough to go show up and crack jokes and find out these like other sober people aren't like mine, like first impression or thought. Like I thought they were going to be like freaks, weirdos. Like there was no chance I was going to relate to any sober college student. And I found out like that was the furthest thing from true. And so a space like to hang out was like the most important piece for me.
You guys don't have to be on mute now. We're all in the room, so if you want to just jump in, you're welcome to. But I invite anyone else who might have a response to that to please jump in.
I think that's such a good question, Molly, about how do you end up connecting with other people going through this path of this journey in recovery. And it's something that like I can speak to like not doing that, because I didn't when I was at Boise State. I'd had this experience at the University of Colorado. My use was very public. I blew up, and most of my friends, had I gone back there, would have been very aware that, I shouldn't be hanging out, I shouldn't be partying. And so like, I never went back there because I would have been under a microscope. That's uncomfortable. And at Boise State, I didn't identify myself as having had this past with drugs, because I didn't want to be viewed like that. And so in turn, like, I ended up hanging out with, luckily, a fairly good group of people, but it still brought me back eventually to the point where I once again got fully addicted to opiates. And despite having this college degree, I was now re-addicted to heroin. And, you know, I didn't get involved with people doing the same thing as me until I came to Treehouse. So I think what Robert said, like, I'm sure there was a space available had I been willing to go and look for it. But I think that's key. And I know that's available now at CU and on Yavapai's campus too.
Yeah, that's a really great point. One of the things that we've seen is that on the big universities, sometimes people, the collegiate recovery communities are still small and they change a lot. You can kind of get lost on a big campus. But we've seen, you know, it's powerful. We've got a community college here in Prescott called Yavapai College. And Yavapai has been one of the strongest provided one of the strongest collegiate recovery support systems across the country. It's really on the map as a community college at having, you know, dozens of young people that are participating in collegiate recovery. A lot of them are involved with Treehouse, but more than that too. And they've gotten grants from the governor, and Judy Brennan, who's sitting here next to me, has been a big part of putting that together. And because the college is fairly small, there's this feeling that you know and recognize one another on the campus. It's like, oh, I've got a couple of other people in my class that are also in recovery. And I want to just tie that back to what Sasha talked about a little bit earlier around accountability. And sometimes it's just being in that room with another person and you know you're both in recovery and that you're studying the same things, and you may be hitting the study hall together, and you're like, okay, let's go after this. And a lot of times the conversation might be like, how's it going? You know, before we even start studying or thinking about school, is like, damn, you know, my sponsor, you know, is pushing me to do this, you know, 4th step. And I'm like, you know, blah, blah, blah. And there's this connection around struggle and vulnerability and the emotional stuff, but there's that connection. And in this world, we're connecting with somebody who's not a therapist, is not paid to listen to us. There's not a power difference. It's powerful. And there's this feeling of connection and mirroring and being understood and being seen and being able to really see the other person. And the anxiety that we see, you know, our young people coming in with, having been isolated in their video games or their, you know, Facebook, trying to imagine what life really looks like, you know, that what we see is people start to calm down and relax and connect. And that is the essence of a whole new level of self-esteem that begins to grow. They complete things. And as Sasha said, there's a kind of culture in recovery that invites one another to hold each other accountable. Like, okay, let's meet what time, when, coffee date, you know, around all kinds of things. And it creates this network of support. And I think Linda's going to talk a little bit about ideas of aspirational self, but it begins to feed into the you that is really wanting to live into the best version of itself, you know, in this process of being a learning person on a college campus.
Linda, Linda, I'll say before you do that real quick, we had a question from a comment, and you guys have been amazing answering it online or in this chat, but I was just going to bring it into the conversation so everyone can hear it, and then we can go over to you. But the question was, I have it somewhere here. No, what was the question? You guys are all answering it. That's why it's being students in recovery. What were some of the things that you did not think were going to be difficult as you returned onto the college campus? but ended up being challenging. If some of you don't mind sharing your thoughts on that. Lauren, I'm going to call on you.
I was like, well, kind of what I said in the chat was connecting with normal people who aren't in recovery, because I had being at Treehouse and before being in treatment and going to rehab, like I've been in this bubble of sobriety and recovery. And it was very strange to go back and realize, wait, not everyone's sober. Not everyone like is in recovery or knows like the things. And I would find myself saying certain things and people would just be like, wait, what? And like they wouldn't know what I was talking about because we weren't going through like necessarily the same thing. So it was hard for me to make friends at first because I was very weary around people who were normal, in a way, normal, you know. So yeah, that was very difficult for me. But
did you have anything that you did specifically to kind of help get you across that hurdle?
Yeah, I definitely tried to make friends within the area of study that I was doing. So in theater, we're all extroverts most of the time. So it was pretty easy to make friends in there, but trying to maintain those connections and be honest of like where I come from and like being transparent with them, but also like trying to just like go have a good time with them, like going to the park, going out to the Dells or hiking or something like that. So just, I don't know, working at a true friendship that isn't based on drugs in a way, which was all my relationships before. And so I never known how to have like true friendship until I got into recovery and I was able to take the principles that I've learned there and translate them over to like interacting with just other people. So
over this week, we've been hearing from artists talking about that have gotten sober, talking about how once they were so scared that their artistry or their voice came from those drugs or alcohol, and how once they did get sober, how they really became their true selves and were able to be better artists, not fear sort of dissipated. And that's interesting to hear you talk like that, because we've heard that over and over. Does anyone else have anything they would like to contribute to that? The things that you didn't think were going to be challenging that were?
Yeah, I think one of the things I wrote in the chat about was just like I ended up using drugs and alcohol to treat what I would say now is like anxiety and depression, and overcoming the drugs and alcohol and no longer using those to cope. The anxiety and the depression are still very much real, and they come back full force, even stronger sometimes. You know, after you're going through withdrawals, everything is like you feel like an exposed wire, kind of. So there's a way to address those, and people have different modalities for different methods for doing that. I use exercise and therapy. People use programs of recovery, 12-step programs. But that's something that just because you get rid of the drugs and alcohol, that still exists. So
Thanks for sharing. Linda, can you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, in the recovery community, we get so used to talking with such honesty to one another. That's a little hard because other people don't necessarily talk that way. And just now when you were talking, Blake, I thought about the expression we use in AA when we say one day at a time. And I thought, well, maybe the way to do it is it's one person at a time, one conversation at a time. You just start someplace. What Molly referred to earlier was some research I did on the way a person alcoholism sees themselves and a person in recovery. And what we discovered is that people in recovery can see that person they were, what they were like back then. So they have that image of that addicted, alcoholic person. Then they get to see themselves in recovery, so they see the recovering person. And then what starts to happen, and I hear some of you kind of referring to it, they start to see the person they're becoming and the person they can be. And sorry. And we call that the aspirational self. So you can see the self you were when you drank, the self you are now, and then you start to see that self you're becoming and the self you can aspire to be. And all that happens in that storytelling. As I hear myself talk, so I'm talking to you, I hear me talking. And when you're talking, I feel like it's me too, because, you know, I identify so much. But that's a gift of the program. We learn to identify with one another. And it takes a while to find people out there, normies, who have that capacity. So maybe it's our job to help them, you know, help them learn how to be what we are, to be these beautiful human beings who figure out how to connect in deep ways.
You were talking about, you had talked before, Linda, about some of the work you do on camp in your classes about really approaching a project, getting them to talk like they're marketing to you.
Yes.
Tell us this. I'm not butchering it.
I have a class that I teach at ASU that's called Communication, Alcoholism, and Recovery. And there are 30 students in the class. And what they do in the class is they participate in a simulated marketing campaign, a simulated organization that runs a campaign called DYK10, Do You Know 10? And the theme of the campaign is, if you know 10 people who drink, one of them has alcoholism. And so the campaign targets two audiences. Well, three. Everybody is one audience. The second audience is the one who has the problem with alcohol. And the other audience are the 9 who don't. Because the problem is, particularly on a college campus, people who drink who don't have alcoholism, who don't have the genetic predisposition and the chemistry that we have, they can do things we can't do. And so they just think, well, why don't you just act like me? And then we often feel like, well, why don't I? You know, if only I could be you and do that. And so what I try to do is teach in my class people to understand that and understand it in a deep way, not a way that you can do like an answer on a piece of paper, you know, like a quick paragraph. I want them to really get it. So I discovered that if they have to learn about it enough to teach other people, they really start to understand. And so they go out and they work on this DYK10 campaign and they start talking and having conversations. And what happens, I think, for most of them by the end of the semester, they understand, they have compassion. Some of them come to recognize that they themselves have a problem and it's okay. There's something they can do about it. So my goal is to, one conversation at a time, try to destigmatize alcoholism. Because one of the reasons it's so hard, particularly for younger people, is what one of you said before. Think of alcoholism as something that's old people. You know, that's one of the campaign pictures that we have, you know, an old guy on a couch, and the old guy's about 30, by the way.
Right.
Molly and I are laughing at that one, right, Molly?
That's right. Those old guys are like our children. You know?
Yeah. What old guy? That old. Oh, okay. You know, it's just patience. Like we learn patience with our recovery. It's a step at a time, you know, an attempt at a time, conversation at a time. And maybe that's what people who are in recovery start to learn. And when you're at a place that has a program like Rutgers, or like the community college that Molly was talking about, or some of the other places that some of you are familiar with, you have a support system, and that's a little bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I can jump in for a minute on this, Will, because, you know, there are lots of types of support, like Yavapai College, Treehouse, the Haven at college is a wonderful like network of organizations on college campuses that have everything from sober housing to clinical support on the college campus to just therapy, you know, therapeutic team or small groups. And I think all of this has been a way to say, to provide a door to walk through where you can you don't have to have all the wheels come off. You don't have to fail out of school or duct tape yourself into your dorm room smoking weed and miss all of your classes, you know, until your parents finally find out what's going on and go to treatment. It doesn't have to go like that. That there are opportunities to begin to talk about being uncomfortable, even if it's not an addiction issue, it's just social anxiety and depression and feeling like you're over your head and really not really ready to launch and be on your own, and you just get overwhelmed with anxiety. So I think there's this pathway that's come about as a result of this notion of the transformative process around recovery. So I think about people being able to connect with one another and have an honest conversation about what's going on that I'm not happy about. What am I doing that I wish I wasn't doing, you know? And then from that point, feel a connection and being able to find a group of people that don't want to do stuff they were doing before that really caused lots of problems in their life. And it's raising the bottom, if you will, and letting people begin to become more self-aware. They may not actually be alcoholics or addicts. They may have just really they can get the wheels back on before a serious addiction gets kicked in. But what's exciting to me about recovery and working with young people is that I think the young people who've struggled have been willing to question their certainties about themselves.
Mhm.
And they're beginning to say, the world is not as I think it is. And
Mhm.
I'm not as I think I am. But I don't know what it is, but I'm going to pay attention in a different way. And when that begins to happen, the fabric of the matrix begins to shred a little bit, and you get a glimpse of the sort of, and a desire and a hunger for the mystery that sits behind it.
Mhm.
And there is our entry point into effectiveness, not only in our own lives to kind of rise into the capacity that we really got, but also to affect the world in a much more powerful way. So we're struggling with recovery from COVID, from capitalism, from Catholicism, not only alcoholism, but there's lots of isms.
Yeah.
And those of us that have some experience with recovery have those principles that we can begin to apply into the worlds we enter. And one of the threads that's been so powerful, I think, has been the opportunity for creative expression, for an artistic expression, some way to discover yourself on the page, in the voice, as Lauren sings, like, oh my God, like something new is born, right?
Yeah.
And that I think it's why things like, pieces like the white chip,
Right.
like being able to bring opportunities for expression, for theater, for performance into the field of recovery, into treatment, into just for young people who've been kind of hiding out behind text messaging, behind Facebook, behind Instagram, all of that, and start to come out and discover who are they in real time? Who do I discover I am when I'm talking to you? And there's this range of possible growth. And from that comes the new ideas and new way of thinking that I think can have a huge impact on a world that is really longing for something fresh to emerge.
Exactly. I think you see that in White Chip. He's so talented and he is so articulate and so charming. And he uses that to get sicker and sicker and sicker. And he does not see it. He even says to us, I got away with that. Phew. And all of a sudden he starts to see it. And those of us in recovery know that that is the beginning of his recovery, when he is seeing what he really is and he doesn't like it anymore. And it still takes him a while until he can get and sustain his recovery. But I found that a beautiful portrayal of what that's really like. That's pretty brave. Not everybody can look at themselves, and our programs that we participate in help us to have the courage to take that look and swallow hard and just start to work at it. And Blake was saying earlier, not everything goes away, you know, and some things we have to find other ways to solve, but we have ourselves then. When we're sober, there's nothing we can't figure out how to do or how to get the help with. And I just think back to when I drank, how I thought that alcohol was going to help solve the things I was trying to solve. I am so grateful these days that I don't drink. I think about the people in the bars. I think about what to do because there are no bars to go into and no stores that are open. I am so glad I am not there.
It's really interesting because we've been talking about this over the past few days, Molly, but the way you describe once you become interested in knowing the truth behind things that might be, or the real truth behind things that you might have understood as one thing, but maybe different, you begin to question yourself and your experience. It is the same thing that we do as actors or as theater artists in telling stories. And like, you know, I'm playing this character. It doesn't look like a very great person, but how do I find the reality of that? Actually, Lauren, you're studying theater right now. I'd be curious to know if any of your, like, if you've applied any of the things you've learned in recovery to your process as an artist, or if that's, if those things have informed each other at all for you in your stage of development.
It's crazy. Everything that I've gone through has enriched my character of myself, like my actual character, and my passion for what I want to do. And it's like, I don't know, we have these in theater, we have like a character, we put ourselves in that character's shoes, but sometimes if you can't necessarily relate to a character, you have to take situations that maybe are a little similar, that you can take the emotion you had and put that into that character itself. And it, you know, it has helped me so much in putting more depth and genuineness into my performances and into my monologues or my scenes. And I recently got a character who, she was definitely like the devilish side of Lauren, you know, like all the ways I can act, but it's like, it's as someone different, but it's like I could take all of those situations that I've been in, those little thoughts, the total attention seeker, and put that into that character, and it made her so much more lively and real. And I think the journey of recovery, and even through drug addiction, it paves a path of, I can't even explain it, but it's just, you become more human and you realize how human you are. And you look around and you see other people as exactly who they are. And like, we're all vulnerable and hurting at times, but we can come together and create these platforms to express those feelings. And that's why I think theater and expressive arts are so important for people in recovery and education in general, because it allows access to those inner, the deepest, darkest parts of us that we don't want to show, but are so beautiful once we do. So
that's great. That's great. Molly, I think we're going to be at time soon, and Molly, I want to throw it back to you for a few minutes to wrap us up. But before we do, I just want to let everyone know that everything that you've heard talked about today, we will have links and resources available to you on our website, so you can go straight to arizonatheater.org to find the people on our panel. And you guys have all mentioned some of the amazing work that you've been doing and that you are currently doing. So if you would like us to include your app or the work you're doing in anywhere what you're doing on campuses, please make sure we have those. And also just to mention to everyone that this is a ongoing conversation, and just because you weren't here with us today watching this, please comment, please ask questions, and we will make sure we get back to our panelists to get answers for you. I think that's everything. But I want to throw it to you, Molly, to maybe wrap us up and tie this conversation up.
Sure, great, thank you so much. you know, one of the things that we've seen is that when we start, and I'm in long-term recovery myself, and when I was in undergrad, I wasn't in long-term recovery. I was in active use. But before grad school, I got into recovery, and what I saw was that, you know, in the rooms of, if it's a 12-step room or whatever, you know, process of recovery, we need to learn to speak from the heart and to talk about what's real and true and the hard stuff, to talk about that. And little by little, we get comfortable with that on the spot expression. So when I look at our young people that are in recovery, they're in the top quarter of their classes. They are killing it in school, and almost all of them at one time failed out of school. So there's this powerful set of tools that we build in recovery of self-expression, listening, understanding, insight about ourselves that we bring into the classroom. And it makes us more curious, more interested, more able to pay attention. And that fuels the desire for deeper recovery, because it's a discovery of self as well as discovery of the world. So the connection between learning and college and learning environments and recovery is a very strong contributor. Each one, the process of learning contributes to the ongoing interest of the mystery of kind of the hero's journey that we go through in the process of recovery and connecting with others. So it's a place where people who had failed in those environments and are afraid to be in those environments can really, with connection with some you know, a community, really thrive. And they go from, there's a kind of a joke, you go from jail to Yale. You go from but from having really struggled to being very successful, and I think, and our students tend to be almost surprised at how well they do, and then they're not surprised after that.
That's amazing. You know, thank you everyone for joining us today. I mean, Linda, Blake, Sasha, Robert, Lauren, Molly, you guys are all like very inspirational, and it's amazing you talked about how much how you learned to do school better, basically. But the amount of degrees between the group here and that you have and are continuing to amass is really like inspirational to just see how you've taken what's your experience and like translated that into your life, right? How you're gonna make a life for yourself. So thank you for sharing your stories, and I think that's our time today, everyone. Thank you, and thank you everyone at home. Please go online and check out the White Ship reading, available only through tomorrow, Friday. So see it while you can, and again, check out our resources section in our digital black box and in our classroom online. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Will.